So imagine signing this massive peace agreement, right? You get a guarantee that the guns will finally go silent.
Right. The perfect headline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you realize you intentionally left out the people who are holding like 90% of the actual weapons.
Which is just, I mean, it sounds completely absurd.
It does. It sounds like a joke.
Yeah.
But today, we're actually looking at an international agreement that essentially does exactly that. And we're going to explore why, a piece of paper that's supposedly designed to stop a conflict might actually be the very thing that accelerates it.
Yeah, it's a fascinating situation.
So welcome to this deep dive, custom tailored for you. Today we're unpacking a heavily debated piece of analysis that just dropped today, actually, June 15th, 2026. It's by Eric Rinehart, and it's titled The 60-Day Speed Bump to Regional Escalation, 60 Days to Nowhere.
Yeah, that is an incredibly stark title.
Seriously stark.
And the geopolitical reality he's describing in this piece is even starker. Because Rinehart is arguing that what looks like a diplomatic victory on the surface, like on camera, is actually a structural disaster underneath.
Right, and we should clarify right up front, Rinehart pulls absolutely no punches here.
Yeah.
He is highly critical of the current U.S. administration's strategy, specifically pointing to Trump and his approach to, high-stakes negotiation.
Right, he names names.
He does. But just so we're clear, we aren't here to weigh in on the politics of it or take partisan sides. Our goal here is just to extract the underlying diplomatic mechanics he's pointing at. Because, frankly, whether you agree with the administration or not, the architecture of this new deal is fascinating.
It really is.
And understanding it is pretty crucial for grasping what might happen next on the global stage.
Precisely. So our mission today is to dissect the mechanics of Rinehart's core argument. He posits that replacing this massive, heavily enforced multilateral agreement with Iran for a very brief, 60-day bilateral memorandum of understanding and MOU is an illusion.
It's just a total mirage.
Yeah. It is not a durable peace. It's just a speed bump on the way to a much larger, much more dangerous escalation.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to understand why this author is predicting an inevitable failure, we really have to look at the before and after pictures of the diplomatic paperwork itself.
The literal architecture of the deal.
Right, exactly. Because it's not just about what is being promised, it's about the legal framework holding those promises together.
Mm-hmm.
So in the before picture, we had a highly complex multilateral deal.
Which is very different from an MOU.
Totally. This wasn't just two guys shaking hands in a room. It was years of grinding negotiations involving the United States, Europe, Russia, and China.
And we really have to pause and look at what that actually means mechanically. Getting the U.S., European powers, Russia, and China to align on a single geopolitical goal is a monumental feat.
It's almost historically unnatural.
It really is. But when you do achieve that, the resulting document carries a very specific kind of weight. It binds the target nation, in this case, Iran, into this dense global web.
Because if you violate the deal, you aren't just angering Washington.
Exactly. You are actively alienating Beijing and Moscow, which are, vital economic lifelines for Tehran. So the pressure comes from all sides.
Right. And crucially, that old web had physical enforcement. Like Rinehart points out that there were inspectors actually on the ground verifying compliance. And there was this mechanism called snapback sanctions.
Oh, the snapback mechanism, yeah.
Which I feel like is a term people hear a lot on the news, right? They just hear snapback and think it means more penalties. But how does a snapback actually function in the plumbing of international law?
It's a brilliant mechanism, really. You have to think of snapback sanctions like a tripwire.
Okay, a tripwire.
Yeah, because in traditional diplomacy, if you want to punish a country with United Nations sanctions, you have to hold a vote. And any of the permanent Security Council members like Russia or China can veto it.
Which usually paralyzes the UN, right?
Exactly. The UN gets deadlocked all the time over that. But a snapback mechanism changes the default setting. It's pre-negotiated so that if international inspectors catch a violation, the old crushing economic penalties instantly fall back into place automatically.
Wow, so no one can stop it once it's triggered.
Right. No new votes are required, which means no one can veto it. The trap simply springs shut.
That's fascinating. So it's an automatic penalty system spread across multiple global superpowers. That's our before picture. But the after picture. Rinehart says we traded all of that infrastructure for a 60-day bilateral MOU.
Yeah, a memorandum of understanding between just two governments.
Right. It promises to extend a ceasefire, reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and maybe talk about nuclear stockpiles later. From a mechanical standpoint, what actually is a bilateral MOU compared to a ratified multilateral treaty?
Legally speaking, a memorandum of understanding is essentially a diplomatic handshake.
A handshake.
Yeah, it outlines an agreement in principle, but it generally lacks the binding international legal teeth of a ratified treaty.
Mhm.
It doesn't have the independent inspectors, doesn't have the automatic tripwires like snapback sanctions.
Just relies entirely on goodwill.
Exactly. It relies entirely on the goodwill of the two signing parties.
Okay, so to put that in perspective, it sounds like trading a heavily vetted corporate contract, backed by teams of ruthless lawyers and third-party auditors, for a sticky note that just says, I owe you.
That is exactly it. What's fascinating here is exactly that contrast. Rinehart calls this a downgrade dressed up as a breakthrough.
A downgrade dressed up as a breakthrough. That's a great line.
It is, because you're stripping away the rigid, boring, highly technical enforcement mechanisms that actually constrain a state and replacing them with a piece of paper that looks fantastic on television.
Oh, right. You get the photo op.
Exactly. You get the photo op of two leaders signing something and talking about a ceasefire, but you lose the structural integrity to hold anyone accountable when the cameras leave.
But I'm struggling to see the logic here from the administration side, to be honest. If the U.S. knows this MOU lacks teeth, and Iran knows it lacks teeth, why bother signing it at all?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question.
Right. Like, what is the strategic value of a piece of paper everyone knows is inherently weak? I mean, to play devil's advocate for a second, isn't a 60-day pause in direct conflict, even a flimsy one, better than active warfare? Doesn't it at least buy the diplomats some time?
See, this raises an important question, and it targets the exact conceptual trap that Rinehart argues this administration fell into.
Yeah.
That assumption that a 60-day pause buys you time to figure things out relies on a very Western, very traditional view of warfare.
How so?
It assumes Iran operates like a conventional state that simply orders its uniformed military to stand down. Rinehart's second major point completely dismantles this. He argues that this bilateral MOU fundamentally misinterprets the mechanics of how Iran projects power.
Because Iran rarely projects power directly under its own flag. They use proxies. I remember the text specifically names them. Hezbollah in Lebanon, various heavily armed militias operating throughout Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis down in Yemen.
Right. It's a sprawling, decentralized network of armed groups. And we really have to understand how this relationship functions mechanically.
It's not just a traditional military chain of command.
Not at all. Iran doesn't just call these groups on a secure phone and give them marching orders. They provide funding, often moved through complex networks of shell companies or literal cash smuggling to evade international banking sanctions.
Wow.
Yeah. They provide advanced weaponry, drone technology, and training.
Rinehart uses the metaphor of the hub and the spokes to describe this, right? Iran is the hub and the proxy groups are the spokes.
Yes. And that metaphor is the key to understanding why this MOU is so dangerous. The bilateral memo is a piece of paper that only talks to the hub.
Oh, I see.
It binds the state of Iran, but it completely ignores the spokes.
It's like prosecuting a mob boss for a broken window, while completely ignoring that his lieutenants are actively burning down the rest of the city.
That is a perfect analogy.
Like he gets to sit in court, point at his clean criminal record, and say, look, my hands are clean, while his entire network just continues doing the dirty work.
That is the exact dynamic of plausible deniability on the international stage. Because diplomatically, pinning a proxy attack on a sovereign state is incredibly difficult.
Because of the burden of proof.
Yes. If a militia in Syria fires a rocket, the international community might know the rocket was manufactured in Iran, and they might know the funds came from Tehran.
Right.
But legally proving a direct chain of command to satisfy a diplomatic tribunal, that is a massive hurdle.
So the play here is completely predictable then. The MOU goes into effect. The hub promises not to attack. But a week later, the militias launch a strike.
Exactly.
And Tehran just throws their hands up, points at the 60-day memo, and says, hey, we are honoring the ceasefire. We can't control what independent actors do.
The violence continues, but the state-level consequence is zero. The deniability keeps flowing.
That's terrifying.
And the tragic irony is that the MOU sits there on a desk in Washington looking perfectly intact because the state of Iran hasn't technically violated it.
Even while the entire region burns around it.
Yes. This is why Rinehart insists you cannot stabilize a proxy war with a piece of paper that only acknowledges the state.
Wow. Okay. So if the U.S. signs this and essentially agrees to absorb all this proxy violence as just, background noise in order to keep the MOU alive on paper, what about the countries who actually share a border with those proxies?
That's the crux of the issue.
Because Washington is an ocean away, but someone else is right next door. And they
Yeah.
definitely can't just ignore it.
Right. And that physical reality is the ultimate breaking point of this entire diplomatic strategy. Geography dictates policy.
Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Because the math changes completely depending on where you're standing. It's the difference between watching a hurricane on the Weather Channel from 1,000 miles away versus living in a house directly in the storm's path with the roof rattling.
That's a very vivid way to put it.
Well, Rinehart points out the staggering distance, right?
Yeah.
Washington, D.C. is 5,700 miles away from Tehran.
Which means the United States has the luxury of distance.
Right. If you, listening to this, are wondering how a proxy skirmish half a world away actually impacts you. For the U.S., a collapsed MOU means a spike in shipping costs.
It means a bad week for the stock market.
Exactly. It means the price of crude oil jumps and you feel a serious hit at the gas pump next month, especially since this memo involves keeping the Strait of Hormuz open.
And let's clarify why the Strait of Hormuz is so central to this. It is a narrow maritime choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
It's tiny, right?
Very. At its narrowest, it's only about 21 miles wide. But roughly 20% of the world's total oil consumption passes through it.
20%, that's huge.
Yeah. If proxy violence threatens those waters, insurance premiums for oil tankers skyrocket or shipping halts entirely, that causes an immediate global energy panic.
So for Washington, the fallout is mostly economic friction and political embarrassment. But for Israel, they don't have 500 to 700 miles of buffer.
No, they don't.
They are physically located inside the blast radius. They aren't dealing with unfriendly neighbors in a theoretical sense. They are sharing borders with heavily armed spokes of that Iranian network.
Spokes whose explicitly stated goal is the erasure of the Israeli state.
Right. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at how Israeli intelligence and military leadership are going to interpret this 60-day document.
Oh, absolutely. If they look at this bilateral memo and realize it is effectively acting as a shield for Iran buying Tehran time, potentially injecting them with cash through loosened sanctions.
All while the proxies continue to arm themselves right on Israel's border.
Yes, Israel cannot afford to wait and see how the 60 days play out.
Because waiting is an existential risk. So, Rinehart predicts they will act preemptively.
Without a doubt. And preemptive action in this context isn't necessarily rolling tanks across a border.
What's it look like mechanically?
Mechanically, it looks like covert strikes. It looks like highly sophisticated cyber operations designed to brick Iranian centrifuges or radar systems.
Okay.
It means targeted assassinations of key proxy commanders or precision airstrikes on weapons convoys moving through Syria before they can reach Lebanon.
And the second Israel initiates one of those preemptive strikes to protect its own borders,
Yeah.
the entire illusion of the MOU shatters.
Instantly. Because the moment Israel strikes a spoke, the proxy network responds. Then Iran, the hub, is forced to respond to save face and project strength.
The dominoes fall.
They fall in a matter of hours. The 60-day ceasefire dissolves into active regional warfare.
Which puts the United States in an impossible bind. Because when those dominoes fall, the U.S. administration has to make a choice.
A very difficult choice.
Right. They have to choose between defending this flimsy 60-day handshake agreement they just staked their reputation on, or defending their closest strategic ally in the region.
And as Rinehart points out, there isn't a U.S. administration in modern history that will abandon Israel to save a flawed bilateral memo.
It's a guaranteed collision course. The architecture of the deal actively creates the conditions for its own demise.
It really does. And this brings us to Rinehart's assessment of the leadership style that created this document in the first place. He notes in the text that he has an MBA and has studied Trump's specific style of negotiation since his time in business school.
That's a really interesting lens. He's analyzing this not purely as a political scientist, but as someone who understands the mechanics of high-stakes corporate deal-making.
Yes, and he draws a very sharp distinction between business transactions and real statecraft.
How so?
Well, in a business deal, a signed letter of intent or a flashy MOU can manipulate stock prices or secure a news cycle. But statecraft requires a grinding, deeply technical focus on enforcement and worst-case scenarios.
Right, you can't just walk away from a bad treaty like you can a bad merger.
Exactly. Rinehart concludes that this 60-day MOU is the product of a negotiator who, in his words, loves the announcement more than the aftermath.
Wow. That phrasing is incredible. Loves the announcement more than the aftermath.
It really hits the nail on the head.
It perfectly distills the danger of treating international diplomacy like a reality television reveal. You prioritize the dramatic handshake and the breaking news banner over the grueling, boring, microscopic work required to actually disarm a nuclear-capable state and its militia network.
You cannot gamble with an ally's geographic reality just to secure a victory lap in Washington.
Because the aftermath always arrives.
It always arrives, and if you don't build the architecture to handle the aftermath, you aren't building a bridge to peace. You're just building a speed bump on the way to a larger war.
So what does this all mean? When we pull all of these threads together, Rinehart is essentially warning us about 3 fatal flaws in this diplomatic strategy.
Right.
First, the architecture downgrading, creating a heavily enforced multi-nation web of sanctions for a weak two-party handshake.
Yep, the sticky note instead of the contract.
Exactly. Second, the plausible deniability loophole, creating a document that binds the state but gives total freedom to the proxy militias actually doing the fighting.
It's a hub and the spokes.
Right. And third, the geographic reality, ignoring the fact that countries living inside the blast radius, like Israel, will never let a flimsy memo compromise their actual survival.
Exactly. It's a house of cards built directly on top of a geopolitical fault line, a brief pause with a ticking clock destined to collapse the moment the real world tests it.
And as we wrap up, diving into the mechanics of this flawed memo leaves us with a massive, lingering question that goes far beyond this one 60-day agreement.
It does. It raises much bigger issues.
Right. If we look at the way modern conflicts are fought with hubs and spokes, with states funding decentralized, off-the-books militias, how on earth do future diplomatic treaties need to evolve?
That is the question.
If traditional state-to-state agreements are becoming obsolete because they simply cannot legally bind non-state actors, how do you draft a treaty that actually holds an entire shadow network accountable?
That might be the most critical question facing international law today. How do you legally bind the spokes when only the hub has a pen?
It is a puzzle that diplomats are going to have to solve quickly, because the old paperwork clearly isn't working anymore.
Not at all.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope breaking down the mechanics of this agreement gives you a much clearer lens to view the headlines through, whether you're watching the news, checking the stock market, or paying at the pump.
Yeah, there's always more beneath the surface.
Keep questioning the structure of things, keep looking beneath the surface, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.